Welcome to our second Digital Dialogues event, MedTech Expertise from the Leading Specialists. Today's webinar is on companion diagnostics under IVDR. Before we start, here's some organizational information. As we only have 45 minutes for the webinar, unfortunately, we cannot answer all your individual questions. We will answer some short questions at the end of the presentation. For this, please write your question in Q&A. If you have detailed questions, we will be happy to answer them in individual one-to-one meetings with our experts. To take part in a one-to-one meeting, please register on our event website. For further inquiries, you can also contact us by email. After the webinar, the presentation will be shared by email. At the end of the session, we will publish a link to a survey. This survey will only take a few minutes of your time. We would be grateful if you could give us a brief feedback. This allows us to improve our services and adapt them to your needs. Now, let's not waste valuable time and let me give you the floor to our expert, James Hewitt.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest Digital Dialogue series on companion diagnostics under IVDR. My name is James Hewitt. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I'm an IVD product expert for TÜV SÜD, and prior to me joining TÜV SÜD, I worked for the best part of 10 years in the design and development of companion diagnostics for the US and EU markets. My focus areas obviously are companion diagnostics, and you can find my contact details on the right-hand side of the screen below. Okay. So to start with regards to an agenda, we will discuss an introduction to companion diagnostics, just to start with some fundamentals. I will then discuss companion diagnostics under the directive. So what is the current state of play? I will then summarise the requirements under the IVDR for companion diagnostics, and then I will move on to discuss the CDX technical working group. I will provide you a background on what this is, its objectives and where we are to date. And then finally, I will complete the presentation with a discussion on the draft CDX consultation procedure with the European Medicines Agency. So just to start with some basics. What are companion diagnostics? They are a specific type of medical device, often an IVD, which provide patient information which is essential for the safe and effective use of a corresponding medicinal product. They are designed and developed to detect specific biomarkers, and these biomarkers have been demonstrated to predict patient benefit or severe adverse reactions to a given therapeutic. They are often characterized under the title of personalized healthcare or precision medicine. And the basis for this is really their whole purpose. It's not about a blanket prescription. It's about finding, based on an individual patient's biomarker status, that one drug that is going to be most effective for that one individual patient. It is an established concept, particularly within oncology, where the integration of biomarker into drug development has driven increasing numbers of new personalized medicines. We are now seeing that this is being expanded into new and different therapeutic areas, such as autoimmune disorders and fertility as two particular examples. So we expect this concept of biomarker-driven therapeutics to continue to grow into the future. Currently within the European Union, CDX IVD devices are regulated under the In-Vitro Diagnostics Medical Devices Directive. Under the directive, or IVDD, CDX devices are classified as General IVDs, so a low-risk self-certified device. They aren't part of the List A or List B product listing. What this means in practical terms is there is no requirement for notified body oversight as part of the conformity assessment procedure. And in addition, under this existing regulatory framework, there is no connection between the approval of a CDX and the corresponding medicinal product. So currently, a manufacturer will follow the conformity assessment route described in Annex 3 of the directive. They will need to have a QMS which is in compliance with the directive. They will prepare their technical documentation, have systems and processes in place for PMS and vigilance. The manufacturer will then prepare their declaration of conformity, and the device is CE marked. So this is how it currently is. However, as I'm sure everyone is very well aware, the directive will be replaced by the Medical Devices Regulation, or IVDR, becoming fully effective on the 26th of May next year. So we're effectively 1 year away from that date of application. From this date, all CDX devices and indeed all IVD devices in Europe must be in compliance with the IVDR. The intent of the IVDR is essentially the same as the preceding directive. However, under the IVDR, many more devices will require assessment by notified bodies. There are several new sections that have been added to the regulation which have no equivalent in the directive. So, for example, there are new product groups which include, for the first time, companion diagnostics. Unlike the IVDD, the IVDR outlines specific requirements for CDX devices, and these requirements are distributed throughout the regulation. Over the subsequent slides, we will review what these requirements are in detail, but broadly speaking, these are categorized into 5 key areas. First of all, definition, classification, performance evaluation, labeling, and the involvement of a medicinal products authority as part of the conformity assessment of the device. So to start with, the IVDR provides a definition as a device which is essential for the safe and effective use of a corresponding medicinal product to A, identify before and or during treatment patients who are most likely to benefit from the corresponding medicinal product, or B, identify before and or during treatment patients likely to be at increased risk of serious adverse reactions as a result of treatment with the corresponding medicinal product. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the US FDA definition, will note that these definitions are closely aligned. However, with the exception of monitoring of a medicinal product for the purpose of adjusting, so for example, dose, which is not part of the EU definition. And indeed, the regulation clarifies this in recital 12, which states that devices that are used with a view to monitoring treatment with a medicinal product in order to ensure that the concentration of relevant substances in the human body is within the therapeutic window are not considered to be companion diagnostic. So that is a difference that manufacturers who are placing devices on the market in the US and EU need to be aware of. Moving on to classification, the IVDR introduces a new rules-based classification, and you can see here this is represented by the schematic. So there are 7 rules in total which classify devices into one of 4 classes, so class A up to class D. Class A devices represent the lowest risk and are self-certified by a manufacturer, up to Class D, which represent the highest risk devices. This graphic just also represents the types of devices which are classified under each of the rules into each of the respective device classes there. From this schematic that companion diagnostics are classified as Class C devices under Rule 3, specifically point F. What this means in practical terms, for the first time, companion diagnostics will require notified body involvement in the conformity assessment procedure. This obviously represents quite a significant shift to the current state under the directive, where there is no notified body oversight, and they have gone from obviously a self-certified device under the directive to the second highest risk under the regulation. In addition, and at odds with many other Class C devices, as per Article 48, CDX devices are exempt from sampling. So the technical documentation for each and every CDX device requires notified body involvement. There is no sampling for CDX devices. The Medical Devices Coordination Group issued a guidance in general for classification for in vitro diagnostics, and this guidance is shown on the slide here, and the link is provided below. Though it was worthwhile just quickly reviewing what it states with regards to companion diagnostics. So this guidance specifically states with regards to CDX devices that biomarker identification may be qualitative and or quantitative in nature, that the biomarkers may be present within healthy populations as well as in patients. And the phrase in the definition in Article 2, before and or during treatment, implies that CDX devices may be intended to be applied before treatment is initiated or during treatment to identify if still A, the patient is likely to benefit, or B, likely to be at increased risk of adverse reactions. And as I say, the link is provided on this slide if you are interested in that particular guidance document. Moving on to performance evaluation. The purpose of performance evaluation is to produce clinical evidence that supports the manufacturer's intended purpose of a given device. And this is represented by the graphic on the slide here. So the intended purpose drives the performance evaluation of the device. And the three key elements to be assessed as part of performance evaluation are scientific validity, analytical performance, and finally data for clinical performance. The IVDR mentions or outlines some specific requirements with regards to scientific validity and data for clinical performance for CDX devices. Whilst there is nothing specific for the analytical performance, obviously analytical performance data will need to be required for CDX devices, as is the case for all IVD devices. So to start with scientific validity, this means, just to provide a definition, the association of an analyte with a clinical condition or physiological state. And a new requirement for IVD devices in the IVDR is that scientific validity needs to be determined for all IVD devices, and this is regardless of whether the devices have already been on the market or if the devices are totally new. It is acknowledged that for novel CDXs where there are novel biomarkers, for example, there may be very limited data to demonstrate scientific validity, and the IVDR has preempted this particular situation, and it states the following: that for companion diagnostics where the scientific validity is not established, the scientific rationale for the use of the biomarker shall be provided by the manufacturer. So it's not sufficient not to have any scientific validity. However, it is expected that where there is limited evidence for CDX, that there should at least be a scientific rationale provided for why that biomarker is predictive. Moving on to the data for clinical performance. Now, the requirements for performance studies in general are outlined in Article 57 and Annex 13. These are applicable to IVD devices, to all IVD devices, not just companions. However, Article 58 of the IVDR details what is termed additional requirements for certain performance studies, and this includes performance studies involving companion diagnostics, and we'll quickly review what those requirements are. Article 58 applies to the following performance studies, so those in which surgically invasive sample taking is done only for the purpose of the performance study, that it is an interventional clinical performance study, where the conduct of the study involves additional invasive procedures or other risks for the subjects of the studies, and finally, those studies involving companion diagnostics. Now, the specific requirements in Article 58 include, amongst others, scientific and ethical review and legal representative where a device sponsor is not located within the European Union, and 16 conditions which are listed out A to P, which must be met prior to initiation of the study. These 16 conditions include, amongst others, ensuring that vulnerable populations and subjects are appropriately protected, that the anticipated benefits to the subjects or to public health justify the foreseeable risks, and that the technical safety of the device with regards to its use has been proven. So, as I said, those requirements must be met prior to the initiation of such a study. However, Article 58 does clarify a key point for companion diagnostics, and that is that these requirements do not apply to performance studies involving companion diagnostics using only leftover samples. So if you're conducting a performance study in sort of a retrospective nature using only leftover samples, and it doesn't meet the definitions of the above, so i.e. surgically invasive sample taking or interventional clinical performance study, then these requirements do not apply to the companion diagnostic device. It does, however, go on to state that these such studies shall, however, be notified to the competent authority. Moving on to some of the labelling requirements. The IVDR contains certain labelling requirements in Annex 1 and Annex 2, which are applicable to CDX devices. These aren't particularly extensive, but it's certainly worthwhile just reviewing what these are. So first of all, information in the instructions for use. which is stated in Annex 1, Chapter 3, states that for companion diagnostics, the International Non-Proprietary Name, or INN, of the associated medicinal product for which is a companion test shall be included. And similarly, in the technical documentation part of the device's intended purpose, which is stated in Annex 2 1.1, states the following, that the relevant target population and the associated medicinal products may be included as well. So what we can sort of gain from this is the IVDR is adopting a much more joined up approach for companion diagnostics and forming a much stronger link between the device and its corresponding medicinal product. One of the key areas which I think most people are particularly interested in and represents sort of a real significant change for the regulation of companion diagnostics in Europe is the role of the medicine authorities in the conformity assessment procedure. In Annex 9 of the IVDR, it outlines the requirements for the involvement of a medicinal products authority as part of the conformity assessment of CDX devices. The Medicinal Products Authority could either be a national competent authority or the European Medicines Agency. Now, it is expected that the overwhelming majority of cases will go through the European Medicines Agency. So the majority of drugs, new drugs being approved in Europe, go through the centralised procedure, and that is through the EMA. However, it is possible that national competent authorities could be the approving agency. And we expect, certainly for legacy products where the device and drug may have been on market for a number of years, it's possibly more likely that a national competent authority rather than the EMA approved that drug in the first instance. It is for the notified body to consult with the agency that approved that medicinal product originally. That is who we as a notified body need to consult with. So for legacy products, if it was an NCA, it is that entity that we would need to liaise with as part of this conformity assessment procedure. However, as I stated, we do expect that the majority would go through the EMA. Specifically, the IVDR states that the notified body shall seek a scientific opinion from the Medicinal Products Authority regarding the suitability of the CDX in relation to the medicinal product concerned. Now, this scientific opinion is to be based upon the draft IFU and summary of safety and performance. So these are the two key documents that the EMA or an NCA will receive and will provide their scientific opinion on. The time frame for this consultation, as stated in the IVDR, is 60 days. However, the EMA or NCA have the possibility to extend this for an additional 60 days. So that could take up to 120 days in total. Should also note that if there are any questions or clarifications from the EMA to the notified body, there is a clock stop. So whilst they have 60 days in total, the overall time frame could be substantially longer, potentially, if there are several rounds of questions and clarifications required. So that is something just to bear in mind. Now, obviously, the IVDR provides the regulation and the overarching intent and framework, but there's clearly detail on how this works in practicality to be determined. In a view to clarify that situation, there was the establishment of the CDX Technical Working Group, which was established last year. And this is an expert group comprised of notified body and EMA representatives. The goal of this working group is to first of all develop a procedural guidance on the consultation of EMA by the notified body on CDX devices. It is also to build relationships between notified body and EMA for the purposes of CDX devices. Knowledge sharing of key processes, and that is on both sides. So the EMA have been sharing their processes with the notified bodies and vice versa. So each entity has a far better understanding of the requirements on both sides. And latterly, the conduct of a pilot project, review the outcome and adapt as necessary. So just to cover some of the key achievements to date. First of all, the draft consultation procedure has been completed, and this will be trialled as part of the pilot project, and we will review that in the subsequent slides. Secondly, there has been the identification of CDX devices to participate in the pilot project. The initial focus will be on legacy devices, and I want to stress that the intent of this pilot is to be as flexible as possible. The intent is not that the pilot needs to reach its final conclusion before we can accept CDX devices. It's just so that we can test key parts of the process to adapt as necessary, so that we have information on the process, which ultimately we can share with our clients to help them better prepare for this consultation procedure. And finally, we have recently completed a workshop between the notified body subgroup and the EMA, CHMP and CAT expert groups. The particular focus at this time is on the data requirements. And as I say, the focus initially will be on those legacy devices. But one of the key things, obviously, this is new for the EMA, and it will be an ideal opportunity for them to have the opportunity to review some example SSPs and instructions for use for the devices. So to review the draft CDX consultation procedure, I stress that this is draft at this point in time and may be subject to change on the basis of the feedback of the pilot project that we are undertaking. Obviously, it will start with a formal application from the manufacturer to the notified body, and this will include items such as the name of the device, the classification, intended purpose, including specific medicinal products related to the device, and the number of devices that are concerned. The notified body will then review that application and will assign competent personnel to conduct the conformity assessment. The notified body will then prepare an intention to submit letter to the European Medicines Agency, and this will include items such as the date of expected submission and the scientific explanation on the suitability of the device in relation to the medicinal product concerned. It is then envisaged that there will be a pre-submission meeting with the EMA notified body and device manufacturer. If it is deemed necessary or required, then it is possible also that the relevant pharmaceutical company may also be included as part of this pre-submission meeting. The notified body will then move on with its key activities. First of all, conducting a technical documentation conformity assessment focused on the product specific information, so the intended purpose, the general safety and performance requirements, performance evaluation, the instructions for use and labelling, the summary of safety and performance, and the post-market surveillance. The notified body will also conduct a quality management system audit to the requirements of the In-Vitro Diagnostics Regulation, and it will cover elements such as design, manufacture, post-market surveillance, vigilance, and regulatory interactions. Upon completion of the technical documentation assessment by the notified body, it is likely that there will be questions or clarifications or deficiencies identified, and these will obviously then be communicated to the device manufacturer, and the device manufacturer will then respond. Depending on those responses, the notified body will make a judgment on whether that has brought the technical documentation into compliance. If there are still gaps identified, then obviously these will need to be routed to the device manufacturer and resolved. Upon such time, the notified body makes a judgment that the technical documentation is within compliance. The notified body will then prepare the submission to the European Medicines Agency, and this will cover the cover letter, procedure number, the completed electronic application form, the draft summary of safety and performance, and the draft instructions for use. The EMA will then have 60 days in which to generate a scientific opinion. However, as I stated previously, in the event that there are any questions or clarifications, this will lead to a clock stop. These will obviously then be fed back to the notified body, and depending on the nature of these questions, there may be the necessity to feed these through the manufacturer and ultimately back to the European Medicines Agency. Also, they do have the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to increase that to an additional 60 days, so 120 days in total, if they deem it necessary. So once the EMA have reached an opinion, there will obviously be one or two outcomes. So if they issue a negative opinion, the notified body shall obviously give due consideration to this advice. In the event that is a positive scientific opinion, the notified body also needs to consider compliance of the manufacturer's quality management system. If it is not within compliance, then the notified body would need to refuse at that point in time until the QMS is brought into compliance. If the QMS is in compliance, and that is the finding of the QMS audit, then the notified body will progress that application and route that through to final certification of the device. So to summarise the draft consultation procedure, following application review by the notified body, the intention to submit letter is sent to the European Medicines Agency. There is a pre-submission meeting between the EMA, MB and manufacturer, and this is held at least 3 to 6 months prior to the submission from the notified body to the European Medicines Agency. The notified body will go on to conduct the technical documentation review and conduct a QMS audit to the requirements of the regulation. The notified body will prepare a submission to the EMA, which will include those two key documents, so the summary of safety and performance and the instructions for use. The EMA will provide its scientific opinion within 60 days, however that could be extended to an additional 60 days, and any questions and clarifications would lead to a clock stop. And then finally, the notified body will give due consideration to EMA opinion, both positive and negative, in its decision to certify the device. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention today, and I hope that you have found this useful. Prior to opening this up to questions, I would just like to bring the participants' attention to a questionnaire. So if you have additional uncertainty about your IVDR requirements for your medical device, we can provide you with a questionnaire to get a full set of potential requirements to help guide manufacturers with IVDR, and the link or where to find this information will be posted in the chat. And with that, I would like to open the floor to questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, James. We have received a few questions. So the first one is, under the IVDR, can a device and drug be co-approved like the FDA approval process?
So that's a really good question. So whilst the IVDR foresees this link, there is nothing in legislation to mandate the co-approval. So there is nothing which will mandate a contemporaneous approval of the drug and device. So to be clear, one will not hold up the approval of the other. Obviously, we understand that the ultimate goal will be to have availability of the drug and the device at the same point in time. So we will endeavour to deliver on that, but there is no strict requirement that they need to be approved at the same point in time under the regulation currently.
Okay, and there is a follow-up question indeed, is when a device, a CDX device is, when a CDX is developed, how will it affect the device approval if the drug approval is delayed?
So I guess it's kind of similar, really. I mean, obviously, depending on how far along the drug is with the EMA or NCA, it may make it difficult for the EMA to issue their scientific opinion if they haven't completed their review of the drug. But certainly from a notified body perspective, we could initiate the technical documentation. But strictly speaking, as I said, that whilst there is this consultation procedure, there is nothing within the legislation which mandates that one cannot be approved without the other. But obviously, as I say, that would be the goal, wherever practically possible, to ensure that both are approved at a similar point in time.
Thank you. So we have more questions. If a device is considered a companion diagnostics in the US, but not in the EU, should I adapt the product information even if the device is the same? Or can I use the same product description in the different markets?
So the key thing really is to ensure that you're in compliance with the IVDR. So you need to ensure that you're in compliance with the regulation. If you're, I think the key thing really is if the classification is different, you couldn't, if you're in your device description, you're specifically saying in the US it's a companion diagnostic and it does not meet that definition within the EU, then obviously that would be an element that would need to be removed. We couldn't accept that. But if the majority of the information would still meet the definition of the IVDR and does not need to be changed, then that would be acceptable. But as I say, the key thing is you need to ensure that you are in compliance with the IVDR.
Thank you. So more question. What is the expectation of the pre-submission meeting? Is just informational for the EMA?
So that's a really good question. And obviously, as part of the CDX technical working group, we'll be working through some of these key items. But initially, sort of our thoughts are it is just to ensure that the EMA have they have prior knowledge of the submission that will be made, and they have an awareness so that they can prepare. Obviously, they have that 60 days, and the intent is not to last minute provide the information to the EMA, but to give them adequate notice so that they can prepare on their side. But as I say, part of the objective of the CDX technical working group will be to further clarify some of those particular items.
So we have one question related to how to differentiate what is not a companion diagnostics. So could you explain more deeply the provision 12 that helps to differentiate what is not a CDX, and in which document can this be accessed?
So I'd say anything based on classification, the MDCG guidance that I cited would be is an incredibly helpful tool to guide you through your classification. And that, similarly, as I stated, that recital 12 states about the monitoring of therapeutic devices, it will give you examples within that MDCG guidance where that will be applicable. So how you could classify monitoring devices, for example. So I'd say the key document that you would want to, that I would point you to, is that MDCG 2020-16 guidance, which I have provided a link to in this presentation, which you will be able to access following today's webinar.
Thank you. So we have a question related to the pilot with the EMA. So what's the current status, and if we can provide a date on when it will be completed?
Yep, so the current status is, as I said, we've had one workshop. We have now provided through the pilot device SSP and instructions for use. So the expert groups from EMA and CHMP, CHIMP, and that also includes, we have some representatives from national competent authorities who are also participating in this. We have our next workshop tomorrow, incidentally, where we will be reviewing the SSPs and IFU. As I've stated at the moment, the main focus obviously is this is the first opportunity that EMA and other groups will have had to look at some live SSPs and IFUs. So for them, it's a good learning experience, and for all of us to get an understanding of what the data requirements are or what types of questions they will ask. Now, at the moment, we don't have any firm completion dates. We have some more dates, workshops in the calendar into June. But as I've stated previously as part of my presentation, the intent is not that we will need to complete this pilot in its entirety. It's such that we want to be able to test some of the key elements of the consultation procedure, and adapt that as we go.
I guess still related to timing is when will the TÜV be able to accept companion diagnostics IVDR applications?
So I would say that you would probably need to consult with your project handler. Technically speaking, we can look to start to engage with our clients on their specific requirements, and individual project handlers or cares will be able to provide with more guidance on that.
We have again one more question on the consultation process and the conformity assessment process. Should the device manufacturer notify the notified body prior technical documentation submission, so the notified body has time to reach out to the EMA for pre-submission?
So that's a good question. I mean, part of the initial stages of any conformity assessment will start with the application phase, and that's quite an in-depth process where the notified body will, as part of that quotation exercise, will have to do certain pre-application activities. So there will be the opportunity then at that point in time for the notified body to be prepared and aware. One of the elements that we as a notified body obviously want to ensure is that we give a realistic time frame to the EMA as to when any applications will be made. So we don't want to do things too early in case there is, several months delay. But I would say for those existing TÜV customers, I'm sure the project handlers or cares probably have a good relationship already and an open dialogue. For new clients, we will start those discussions at the pre-application phase, and we can discuss the timelines at that point in time.
Thank you. So we have one more question in the chat. So for a companion diagnostic, what would be the thought if the drug is being developed and a part of the intended use, but the drug is not approved when the device approval is in process?
Yeah, so is the question what would happen?
Yes. So we have the drug that is still in development, and the device is being approved.
I guess that would also, part of that would definitely depend on whether the EMA or NCA would be able to issue a scientific opinion. So if it's too early for the Medicinal Products Authority to be able to issue a scientific opinion, so if they haven't had adequate time to review the information on the drug side, if we can't get the scientific opinion, then we are not able to move forward. We are legally obligated to provide the IFU and SSP to either EMA and NCA, so it would broadly be driven by that, I would say.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions in the chat at present. We do have time for one more question. There don't seem to be any additional questions at this moment.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your participation today on today's Digital Dialogues. I hope you have found that informative. And yes, you will be provided with a copy of the presentation after today's event. So thank you very much, everyone.